Could you tell us about Jordan's principle?
So Jordan's principle is a very significant part of the TRC calls to action. So do you guys know sort of the way Indian the Indian Act sets up a relationship in the country, and it's loosely based on treaties. And what it says that Indigenous nations, First Nations, have to deal with the Crown, or they deal with the Crown when it comes to treaty and it comes to the relationship with the country. We don't deal with the Prime Minister or provincial leaders. We deal with the Crown, meaning in this case, the Queen of England. Now, of course, the Queen of England doesn't fly over here, so they've got the Governor General and the Lieutenant Governors and the provinces and so on. And generally, the Prime Minister is the proxy representative of the Crown. So generally, we deal with the Prime Minister as kind of a proxy. But it's important to have the Governor General there. And you may be wondering, where is Sinclair going with all of this when it comes to Jordan's principle? Well, Jordan's principle is based on the experience of a young man named Jordan in Manitoba who had special health needs. And these health needs were life-threatening and suffered because Indigenous peoples only deal with the Crown. That means that we deal with the Crown for all services related to our relationship with the country. So those services are education, health, housing, and any issues involving land and territory, hunting and fishing, most things guaranteed to what's referred to as treaty rights or Aboriginal rights. We deal with the Crown. Now, you as a Canadian, you have 3 levels of government that you deal with. So there's the federal government, which deals with like citizenship and money and multiculturalism policy. 2 is you deal with provinces for your provincial and health services. And then lastly, your municipal governments, which get you things like water and streets and that kind of thing. On First Nations communities, we just deal with the Crown, which comes through the Chief and Council. Okay, so we've got this young man named Jordan who has deep health problems. If you are a Manitoban or a Canadian, who do you turn to for health solutions? The province. You go to the province. So you go to your local hospital. The doctors there, hired by the province, they're paid for, and all your services come through your health card and so on. If you're a First Nations person, you have to turn to the federal government. Now, the federal government doesn't deal with health issues. So what they do is they contract out the province to deal with the health issues. And so Jordan's principle is brought up because this issue of this young man named Jordan, he was caught in limbo when his health services had to go through the federal, to be approved by the federal government and delivered by provincial services. And therefore, they kept saying, well, you deal with it, and you deal with it, and you deal with it. Meanwhile, Jordan got sicker and sicker and sicker. Jordan's principle is the idea that any young First Nations child can go to any health facility in the country, and regardless of whether they are status or non-status or what their complication is, they will receive point-of-care service like any other Canadian. But Jordan's principle is, why do you think it's so difficult? Like, why do you think why do you think the federal government took so long to look at the issue of Jordan's principle? Because it isn't just health issues, it's also leading to other issues like child welfare and justice and anything involving Indigenous services in relation to the federal government. This is the same situation, whether it be getting your post-secondary covered, whether it be getting a house, or whether it be having access to adequate pair of glasses, for example. Well, it's a legislative complexity set up by the federal government. A lot of paper, a lot of bureaucrats, and billions of dollars that goes towards administering Indigenous people without actually providing any services for. So it's more and more bureaucracy, and bureaucracies are a bit of a nightmare. So that's why Jordan's principle is so difficult to implement and make sure that there's services provided adequately on reserves. We still have the issue of boil water advisories. There's, many First Nations communities today that have boil water advisories. You can't drink the water. So, the issues are ongoing and very complex. So, Jordan's principle, though, is very simple, isn't it? Is it simple? But yet, it seems not when it comes to the federal government dealing with it. So, Niigaan, thank you.